What would you do if your son came to you and said, "Father, I want to study abroad"? But before he could even pack his bag, the government said, "Not so fast. First, we must approve where you are going, what you are studying, and whether that knowledge will help your country when you return." For many people, that sounds shocking. Some will call it control, some will call it dictatorship, but in Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traore is asking a much deeper question. Should education serve only the dreams of one individual, or should it also serve the survival of an entire nation? Burkina Faso has introduced a new rule that every Burkinabe student who wants to study abroad must first receive approval from the Ministry of Higher Education. This does not only apply to students receiving government scholarships, it also applies to students whose families are paying with their own money. That is why the world is paying attention. The government says it wants to review the training program before the student leaves. It wants to know whether the subject being studied matches the needs of Burkina Faso. If a student ignores this process, the degree earned abroad may not be recognized back home. Now listen carefully. This is not officially a ban on studying abroad. It is a gate. And Traore is saying that before the best minds of Burkina Faso walk through that gate, the nation has the right to ask one question. Will this journey help build the country, or will it simply feed another nation's future? If you care about the changes shaping Africa's future, subscribe to this channel and stay with us, because this story is bigger than education. Brain drain is a phrase we hear all the time, but few people stop to think about what it really means. Imagine spending years raising a brilliant young doctor, engineer, or scientist. Families make sacrifices. Teachers dedicate their lives to educating them. The nation invests in schools, universities, and public services. Then, just when that young professional is ready to contribute, they board a plane and never come back. For decades, this has been one of Africa's greatest silent challenges. Thousands of talented graduates leave every year in search of better salaries, advanced research facilities, safer communities, and stronger career opportunities. Their decisions are understandable. Everyone wants the best future for themselves and their families. But when enough skilled people leave, the country they leave behind pays a heavy price. Burkina Faso is no exception. Like many developing nations, it continues to face shortages of doctors, engineers, agricultural specialists, technology experts, and energy professionals. These are exactly the people needed to improve healthcare, increase food production, expand electricity, modernize infrastructure, and create jobs for future generations. This is where Ibrahim Traore sees the problem differently from many others. In his view, gold is not Burkina Faso's only valuable resource. The country's brightest minds are just as important. A nation that loses its educated citizens may eventually lose its ability to solve its own problems without depending on foreign expertise. Supporters of the new policy argue that education should not become a one-way ticket out of the country. Instead, they believe it should become an investment that eventually returns home. They are not asking whether students should learn from the world. They are asking whether the knowledge gained abroad should ultimately strengthen Burkina Faso itself. That simple question lies at the heart of one of the most controversial education policies Africa has seen in recent years. There is one question that has divided opinions across Africa and beyond. Is the West simply offering better opportunities to talented students? Or has the global competition for skilled workers become a system that quietly benefits wealthy nations while weakening developing ones? Supporters of Ibrahim Traore's policy believe the answer is obvious. Every year, some of Africa's brightest students receive scholarships, pursue advanced degrees, and build successful careers in Europe, North America, and other developed regions. Those countries gain highly educated doctors, engineers, researchers, and technology specialists without paying the full cost of raising and educating them from childhood. Meanwhile, the countries those professionals left behind continue struggling with shortages in exactly those critical fields. From this perspective, brain drain is not just an unfortunate consequence of globalization. It becomes a cycle that allows richer economies to strengthen themselves while poorer nations find it even harder to catch up. This is why some supporters describe it as a silent transfer of Africa's greatest resource, not its gold or minerals, but its people. However, there is another side to this debate that deserves equal attention. There is no evidence that Western governments operate a single coordinated plan to deliberately steal Africa's talent. Most students make their own decisions. They leave because they seek better salaries, greater security, advanced laboratories, or opportunities unavailable at home. Many continue supporting their families by sending money back, investing in businesses, sharing knowledge, or even returning years later with valuable experience. This distinction is important because the real issue may not be that talented people leave. The deeper question is why so many feel they cannot build the same future in their own country. For Traore, the solution is not to close the door to international education. It is to ensure that studying abroad becomes a path that eventually leads home instead of becoming a permanent exit from Burkina Faso. Why would a leader knowingly approve a policy that guarantees criticism from around the world? The answer may lie in how Ibrahim Traore defines national independence. For him, sovereignty is not measured only by who controls a country's borders or natural resources. It is also measured by who develops its future workforce. Since taking power, Traore has repeatedly promoted the idea that Burkina Faso must rely less on foreign assistance and more on its own people. His government has pushed for greater national control over strategic resources, encouraged domestic production, expanded efforts to strengthen agriculture, and emphasized economic self-reliance. Seen from this broader perspective, the education policy is not an isolated decision. It is another piece of a much larger strategy. Traore appears to believe that human talent is every bit as valuable as gold buried beneath the country's soil. A nation may discover new mineral deposits, but replacing an entire generation of skilled professionals is far more difficult. If the country's brightest engineers, doctors, scientists, and innovators leave permanently, Burkina Faso risks becoming dependent on foreign expertise for decades to come. Supporters argue that this explains why the government wants to review what students study before they leave. The objective is not simply to reduce the number of students traveling abroad. Instead, it is to encourage education in fields that directly strengthen the country's future, including healthcare, agriculture, renewable energy, engineering, digital technology, and public administration. Whether one agrees with Traore or not, his approach reflects a consistent philosophy. He sees education as a national investment rather than a purely private decision. In his view, every talented student represents part of Burkina Faso's future capacity to solve its own problems. That belief explains why this controversial policy fits naturally alongside his broader vision of building a more self-reliant and economically independent nation. Not surprisingly, this policy has sparked intense debate both inside and outside Africa. Critics argue that requiring government approval before studying abroad gives the state too much influence over personal decisions. They believe education is a fundamental individual right, and that every student should be free to choose where to study and what career to pursue without government interference. Some also worry about the practical risks. What happens if the approval process becomes slow, inconsistent, or influenced by politics? Could talented students lose valuable opportunities because of unnecessary bureaucracy? These concerns cannot simply be dismissed. Any policy that expands government authority must also include transparency, clear standards, and fair procedures to maintain public trust. Yet supporters of Ibrahim Traore respond with an equally important question. What happens if a developing nation continues losing its best minds year after year? Can a country build modern hospitals without doctors, develop advanced industries without engineers, or compete in artificial intelligence without skilled researchers? They argue that unlimited personal freedom means little if the nation itself remains permanently dependent on foreign expertise. This is why many supporters insist that the debate should not focus only on individual rights. It should also consider collective responsibility. They believe students who receive the benefits of their country's education system should at least be encouraged to acquire skills that help solve national challenges. Ultimately, the success or failure of this policy will not depend only on the law itself. It will depend on how it is implemented. If the approval process is transparent, professional, and focused on national priorities while creating meaningful career opportunities for returning graduates, it could become a model for other developing countries. But if it becomes inefficient, unfair, or politically driven, even a well-intentioned reform could discourage the very young people it hopes to inspire. Could Burkina Faso become the first domino? That is the question many observers across Africa are beginning to ask, whether Ibrahim Traore's education policy succeeds or fails. Other governments will almost certainly be watching the results very closely. Burkina Faso is not the only country struggling with the loss of highly educated professionals. Across the continent, governments continue searching for ways to retain doctors, engineers, teachers, scientists, and technology specialists whose skills are essential for national development. Some countries have already experimented with scholarship agreements, mandatory public service, or incentives encouraging graduates to return home after studying abroad. Traore's approach simply pushes that conversation one step further by placing national priorities at the center of the approval process. The broader lesson for Africa is not necessarily that every country should copy Burkina Faso's model. Every nation has different institutions, economic conditions, and educational needs. Instead, the larger lesson is that human capital deserves the same strategic attention as natural resources. Countries spend enormous effort protecting gold mines, oil fields, and valuable minerals, yet often pay far less attention to protecting the talented people capable of transforming those resources into lasting prosperity. At the same time, governments cannot rely on restrictions alone. The most effective way to keep talented graduates is to give them reasons to stay or strong incentives to return. That means creating competitive careers, supporting innovation, reducing corruption, strengthening universities, improving research opportunities, and building economies where young professionals believe they can succeed. If Burkina Faso can combine strategic planning with genuine opportunities for its returning graduates, this policy may inspire similar reforms elsewhere. But if young people see only barriers without opportunity, other African nations may choose a different path. The future of this debate will depend not on political speeches, but on real results. So, was Ibrahim Traore's decision an act of government control, or was it an attempt to protect one of Burkina Faso's most valuable national resources? The answer may depend on how each of us defines freedom. Is freedom simply the ability to leave, or is it also the opportunity to build a stronger future for the country that raised you? This debate reaches far beyond Burkina Faso. It forces every developing nation to confront a difficult question. How can a country encourage its brightest young people to explore the world without losing them forever. There are no easy answers, but one fact is becoming increasingly clear. In the 21st century, human talent may be even more valuable than gold, oil, or any other natural resource. Whether you agree with Ibrahim Traore's policy or strongly oppose it, his decision has started an important conversation that many governments have avoided for decades. The real measure of success will not be how many students receive permission to study abroad. It will be whether more of those students eventually return with the knowledge, skills, and determination to help build a stronger nation. Now, we would like to hear your opinion. If your country invested in your education from childhood, do you believe you have a responsibility to give something back before building a life elsewhere? Share your thoughts in the comments, because respectful discussions like this help all of us better understand the future of Africa. If you enjoyed this analysis, please subscribe, like this video, and share it with others who care about Africa's future. Together, we can continue exploring the ideas shaping a new generation of leadership across the continent. Pan-African cooperation, the future of Burkina Faso, the vision many associate with Africa New, the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traore, stronger collaboration through the African Union, the ideals of Pan-Africanism, and the continuing influence of Ibrahim Traore will remain central topics as Africa writes the next chapter of its own history.
For decades, a quiet question has followed many young people in Burkina Faso. After graduation, what comes next? For too long, the expected answer was simple. Find a job, serve in office, work for a foreign company, or wait for a government position that may never come. But today, something different is happening. Inside technical universities, the sound of machines is beginning to replace the silence of theory alone. Students are no longer only memorizing formulas from a classroom board. They are touching concrete, testing materials, studying machines, and learning how real production works. That shift may seem small, but for a nation trying to regain control of its future, it is enormous. And this is why many people are asking a powerful question. Is Captain Ibrahim Traore helping end the old era when Burkinabe youth were trained mainly to work for others? Stay with this channel, because stories like this show how Africa is changing from the inside, not through promises from outside powers, but through the hands and minds of its own people. The old education model in many African countries was not built to create owners. It was built to create employees. After the colonial period, many systems continued to prepare students for administrative jobs, clerical work, or service roles inside institutions already controlled by others. In Burkina Faso, this meant that many talented young people were trained to seek permission before creating value. They were told that success meant being hired, but a country cannot build real independence if its brightest minds are only taught to wait for employment. That is the system now being challenged. Many supporters of the current reforms believe that changing this mindset is just as important as building new roads or factories. A nation that depends entirely on others for employment can never fully control its own economic destiny. Real sovereignty begins when citizens have the knowledge and confidence to create opportunities themselves. This philosophy has become increasingly visible under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traore. His administration has repeatedly linked education to national development, arguing that universities should not exist simply to award degrees. Instead, they should produce engineers, technicians, innovators, and entrepreneurs capable of solving Burkina Faso's own challenges. Rather than measuring success by the number of graduates who find positions in foreign companies, the new vision encourages universities to ask a different question. How many graduates can create jobs instead of searching for one? This shift explains why technical education has received renewed attention. Institutions specializing in engineering, construction, agriculture, manufacturing, and industrial technology are becoming central to Burkina Faso's long-term development strategy. Practical training is no longer viewed as secondary to academic theory. It is becoming the foundation upon which future industries can be built. The objective is straightforward, but ambitious. If Burkina Faso hopes to process more of its own raw materials, manufacture more products locally, and strengthen domestic industries, it will need thousands of highly skilled professionals who understand production from the ground up. Supporters argue that this transformation begins inside classrooms, workshops, and laboratories. They see education not merely as preparation for employment, but as preparation for nation building itself. While it will take years to measure the full impact of these reforms, the direction is becoming increasingly clear. Universities are expected to become engines of economic independence rather than factories producing graduates who simply wait to be hired. However, policy statements alone do not explain why so many observers are paying attention to Burkina Faso's universities. The clearest evidence can be found inside the workshops themselves. At the Natsibona University Institute of Technology, first-year civil engineering students are not spending every hour inside lecture halls. Instead, they gather around concrete mixers, piles of sand and granite, laboratory presses, and material testing equipment. Under the supervision of their instructors, they learn how to measure aggregates, test concrete strength, analyze construction materials, and understand the standards that govern modern engineering. For these students, theory becomes something they can see, touch, and verify. Lessons about the curing time of concrete or the properties of building materials are no longer abstract concepts found only in textbooks. They become real experiences that prepare students for construction sites, factories, and industrial projects. University officials describe these practical workshops as the heart of industrial education. Without hands-on experience, they argue, it is impossible to produce engineers capable of meeting the country's development needs. Their vision extends beyond traditional teaching. The laboratories can also support research projects, technical services, and partnerships with businesses, creating stronger links between universities and the productive economy. Another important element is the creation of innovation spaces such as Unipod and multidisciplinary competency centers. These facilities are designed to help students, researchers, and young innovators transform ideas into practical solutions. Instead of encouraging graduates to wait for opportunities, These centers aim to help them create opportunities. This represents more than a change in teaching methods. It reflects a broader belief that universities should become places where industries are born, technologies are improved, and future entrepreneurs gain the confidence to build businesses capable of serving Burkina Faso's own economy. The impact of this new educational approach extends far beyond university campuses. If graduates leave school with practical skills, entrepreneurial thinking, and the confidence to innovate, they become potential employers rather than lifelong employees. One successful engineering company can hire dozens of workers. One manufacturing business can create supply chains that support hundreds of families. This is how education gradually transforms into economic development. Supporters of these reforms believe this is exactly the path Burkina Faso must follow. A country rich in natural resources should not depend indefinitely on exporting raw materials while importing finished products. It needs engineers who can design factories, technicians who can maintain industrial equipment, entrepreneurs who can launch construction firms, and innovators who can develop technologies adapted to local realities. In this vision, universities become strategic institutions for national development rather than isolated academic centers. Every laboratory, every workshop, and every innovation hub becomes an investment in future industries. Students are encouraged to identify problems within their own communities and develop practical solutions instead of waiting for foreign companies to introduce them. This philosophy also represents a cultural transformation. Success is no longer defined only by receiving a monthly salary from someone else. Increasingly, it is associated with creating value, generating employment, and strengthening the country's productive capacity. Of course, education alone cannot guarantee economic transformation. Graduates will still need access to financing, stable markets, modern infrastructure, and supportive public policies. Yet, without an education system capable of producing skilled innovators and entrepreneurs, those other investments would struggle to achieve lasting results. For many observers, this is why Burkina Faso's educational reforms deserve attention. They are not simply changing classrooms. They are attempting to reshape how an entire generation thinks about work, opportunity, and national development. Not everyone views this transformation through the same lens. Critics in some Western media and policy circles argue that Burkina Faso continues to face serious political, economic, and security challenges. They question whether educational reforms alone can produce lasting change while the country confronts armed violence, limited financial resources, and ongoing governance concerns. These are legitimate issues that cannot simply be ignored. A modern education system requires stable institutions, sustained investment, qualified instructors, and strong partnerships with the private sector. Even the most ambitious university reforms cannot immediately solve every structural problem facing a developing nation. Yet, supporters of the current direction offer an important counter-argument. They believe educational reform should be evaluated by its own objectives and outcomes rather than being dismissed because of broader political debates. If universities produce graduates with stronger technical skills, greater entrepreneurial confidence, and the ability to establish successful local businesses, then those achievements carry real value, regardless of ideological disagreements. They also argue that many countries now considered industrial powers invested heavily in technical education long before achieving broad economic prosperity. Factories were built because skilled workers and engineers existed, not the other way around. From this perspective, strengthening universities is not the final destination, but one of the essential first steps toward national development. The road ahead remains challenging. Young entrepreneurs will still need access to affordable financing, reliable electricity, modern transportation networks, and markets where locally manufactured products can compete fairly. Without these complementary conditions, many promising ideas may never become successful enterprises. Even so, Burkina Faso's experience offers an important lesson for other African nations. Lasting development cannot depend solely on natural resources or foreign investment. It also depends on educating a generation capable of creating industries, solving local problems, and building prosperity from within. Perhaps the greatest lesson emerging from Burkina Faso today is that genuine transformation does not begin with grand speeches or expensive infrastructure alone. It begins with changing the way young people think about their future. When universities teach students that they can become innovators instead of spectators, builders instead of followers, and employers instead of employees, they plant the seeds of long-term national resilience. This vision resonates with a broader movement taking shape across the African continent. Increasingly, governments, educators, and young entrepreneurs are asking whether Africa's universities should continue producing graduates whose greatest ambition is to leave their countries, or whether they should become centers that generate ideas, technologies, and businesses capable of transforming local economies. For Burkina Faso, this educational shift is closely connected to a larger national vision associated with Captain Ibrahim Traore. Supporters see it as part of an effort to strengthen economic sovereignty by investing in the country's own human capital. Whether every objective is ultimately achieved remains to be seen. But the emphasis on practical education, innovation, and entrepreneurship represents a significant departure from older development models. The broader lesson for Africa is equally important. Natural resources alone cannot secure prosperity. Foreign investment alone cannot guarantee independence. Sustainable progress depends on citizens who possess the knowledge, technical skills, and determination to solve their own challenges and build their own industries. If that vision continues to grow, universities may become one of the strongest foundations of a new Africa, an Africa where Pan-African cooperation is strengthened through knowledge, where Burkina Faso contributes to an Africa new built on innovation, where Captain Ibrahim Traore's emphasis on self-reliance encourages debate across the African Union, and where the ideals of Pan-Africanism inspire future generations. Above all, the story of Ibrahim Traore's educational reforms reminds us that lasting national strength is built first in the classroom, then in the workshop, and finally in the hands of those willing to create the future themselves. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy thoughtful analysis on Africa's transformation and the ideas shaping its future, please subscribe to the channel and join us in the next discussion. As this journey comes to an end, one message stands above all the others. The true strength of a nation is not measured only by its natural resources or military capabilities. It is measured by the knowledge, creativity, and determination of its people. Every engineer who solves a local problem, every entrepreneur who opens a new business, and every young innovator who transforms an idea into a practical solution contributes to a stronger and more independent future. Burkina Faso's evolving approach to higher education reflects this belief. Instead of preparing graduates to spend their lives waiting for opportunities created elsewhere, universities are increasingly encouraging them to become the people who create those opportunities themselves. Whether this ambitious vision fully succeeds will depend on consistent investment, effective implementation, and the resilience of the country's young generation. Yet, the direction itself represents an important shift in thinking for many across Africa. This story offers more than a national example. It raises an important question for every country seeking long-term development. Should education simply prepare students for existing jobs, or should it empower them to build entirely new industries and transform their own economies? The answers to these questions will shape the future of the continent. If more universities embrace practical learning, innovation, and entrepreneurship, the next generation may become the driving force behind a more confident and self-reliant Africa. That vision reflects the aspirations associated with Pan-African cooperation, the determination of Burkina Faso to strengthen its productive capacity, and the wider conversation inspired by Captain Ibrahim Traore, the African Union, and the ideals of Pan-Africanism. Whether one agrees with every policy or not, Ibrahim Traore has helped bring renewed attention to the role of education in national development. Thank you for watching. If you found this analysis valuable, please subscribe to the channel. Share this video with others who care about Africa's future, and join us again for our next discussion.
What if one of Africa's poorest nations stopped waiting for foreign investors, international lenders, and multinational corporations to shape its future? What if ordinary citizens became the owners of the factories, farms, and industries that power their economy? That is exactly the experiment unfolding in Burkina Faso under Captain Ibrahim Traore. While many African countries continue to rely heavily on foreign capital to finance development, Burkina Faso is attempting something far more ambitious. Through a program known as popular shareholding, hundreds of thousands of citizens are being invited to become direct stakeholders in national economic projects. For decades, Africa has faced a painful contradiction. The continent possesses enormous natural wealth, yet many countries remain dependent on exporting raw materials while importing finished products at higher prices. Burkina Faso has not escaped this reality. The country produces agricultural goods, livestock, and gold. Yet much of the value generated from those resources has historically left the country. Traore's response is built around a simple but powerful question. If Burkina Faso has resources, workers, farmers, and entrepreneurs, why should it always wait for outsiders to finance its development? This question challenges one of the most common assumptions about economic growth in Africa. Rather than asking who will invest in Burkina Faso, the government is asking how Burkinabe citizens can invest in themselves. The goal is not only to raise money, it is to transform the role of citizens within the economy. Instead of remaining consumers, taxpayers, and workers, they are encouraged to become shareholders and co-owners of national development projects. If you enjoy exploring bold economic ideas that could reshape Africa's future, make sure to subscribe and join us for more stories like this. Popular shareholding did not appear out of nowhere. Although many international observers describe it as a new economic experiment, its roots reach deep into African traditions and Burkina Faso's own history. For generations, communities across West Africa survived through collective effort. Families worked shared fields, cared for communal livestock, and contributed labor to projects that benefited everyone. Wealth was often understood not only as an individual achievement, but also as a collective responsibility. The success of one household strengthened the entire community. Supporters of popular shareholding argue that Ibrahim Traore is adapting this traditional spirit to the modern economy. Instead of asking villagers to work together on a communal farm, the model encourages citizens to pool financial resources and become shareholders in enterprises that serve national development goals. The intellectual foundation of this idea is also linked to long-standing debates about African economic independence. Thinkers such as Laurent Gbagbo promoted the concept of community entrepreneurship as a way to mobilize local resources rather than relying exclusively on external funding. Their argument was simple. A nation that cannot finance its own productive sectors will struggle to control its own future. Many observers also see echoes of the philosophy associated with Thomas Sankara. During the 1980s, Sankara emphasized self-reliance, local production, and dignity through work. While the economic tools are different today, the underlying message remains familiar. Development should begin with the people themselves. What makes Traore's approach unique is the attempt to transform a cultural value into a modern financial mechanism. Citizens are not simply encouraged to support development in theory. They are invited to participate directly through ownership. This distinction matters. A factory funded by community shareholders is viewed differently from one financed entirely by foreign investors. For supporters, it creates a stronger connection between economic growth and national responsibility. The project becomes more than a business venture. It becomes a symbol of collective ambition and shared destiny. At first glance, many people compare Ibrahim Traore's economic vision to the model that helped transform Norway into one of the wealthiest nations in the world. Both approaches begin with a similar principle. National resources should benefit the population rather than a small elite or foreign interests. Norway used revenues from its oil and gas sector to build a massive national wealth fund. The state collected and managed those resources on behalf of the population, creating long-term financial security for future generations. It is often presented as one of the most successful examples of resource management in modern history. Burkina Faso shares the same desire for economic sovereignty, but Traore is attempting something fundamentally different. Instead of relying primarily on the state to manage wealth for citizens, he is encouraging citizens to become direct participants in the creation of that wealth. This distinction may seem subtle, but it changes the entire relationship between people and the economy. In the traditional model, citizens benefit indirectly through public services, infrastructure, and government spending. In the Burkinabe model, citizens are invited to become shareholders in projects that seek to generate economic value. Supporters argue that this approach goes beyond ownership on paper. It creates a sense of responsibility and engagement. When people own a stake in a factory, an agricultural project, or a mining enterprise, they may feel a stronger interest in its success. Traore's innovation lies in combining modern investment mechanisms with a community-centered culture. Rather than copying a European model, he has adapted the principle of shared prosperity to local realities. The goal is not merely to distribute wealth after it is created. The goal is to involve citizens in creating that wealth from the beginning. For this reason, many observers believe Burkina Faso is not building a version of Norway. It is attempting to create something uniquely African, shaped by its own history, traditions, and development challenges. Turning an idea into reality required more than speeches and patriotic slogans. To make popular shareholding work, Burkina Faso needed an institution capable of organizing investments, managing subscriptions, and connecting citizens to national development projects. That institution became the Agency for the Promotion of Community Entrepreneurship, widely known as APEC. Created in 2023, APEC was designed to provide the legal and operational framework for community-owned enterprises. Its mission is straightforward but ambitious. It seeks to mobilize domestic savings, identify productive projects, and channel citizen investments into sectors considered essential for national development. One of the most remarkable aspects of the program is its accessibility. Participation is not reserved for wealthy investors or large corporations. Farmers, workers, retirees, small business owners, students, and members of the diaspora can all become shareholders. This broad participation is central to the philosophy behind the initiative. Economic transformation should involve the population as a whole, rather than a limited group of elites. The response has been significant. Hundreds of thousands of Burkinabe citizens have joined the program, while billions of CFA francs have been mobilized to support community enterprises. These figures suggest that many people are willing to contribute financially when they believe they have a direct stake in the outcome. The participation of the diaspora has also played an important role. Burkinabe citizens living abroad are encouraged to invest in projects from their countries of residence, allowing them to contribute to development without returning home permanently. For supporters, the success of APEC is measured by more than the money collected. It represents a shift in mentality. Citizens are no longer viewed simply as beneficiaries of development programs. They are becoming partners in the process. Whether this model ultimately succeeds or fails, it has already changed the conversation about who should finance the future of Burkina Faso. The true test of any economic vision is not the number of speeches delivered or the amount of money collected. The real test is whether tangible results appear on the ground. In Burkina Faso, supporters of popular shareholding point to a growing list of projects that aim to prove the model can move from theory to reality. One of the most visible examples is the development of tomato processing facilities. For years, Burkina Faso produced large quantities of tomatoes, yet the country still depended heavily on imported tomato products. This situation reflected a broader challenge faced by many African economies. Raw materials were produced locally, but much of the value-added processing occurred elsewhere. The new factories seek to change that equation. Instead of exporting agricultural products in their raw form, Burkina Faso aims to process more of them domestically. Supporters believe this approach can create jobs, strengthen local industries, and reduce dependence on imported goods. Agriculture is not the only target. The broader program also includes agricultural mechanization initiatives, centralized purchasing systems for agricultural products, and semi-mechanized mining projects. Each project is designed around the same principle. Resources generated within the country should contribute more directly to national prosperity. The expected benefits extend beyond production figures. New industries can create employment opportunities for young people, provide more stable markets for farmers, and encourage additional investment in local supply chains. Instead of exporting value, the country seeks to retain more of it within its borders. For many citizens, these projects represent something larger than economic development. They symbolize the possibility of transforming Burkina Faso from a supplier of raw materials into a producer of finished goods. Whether that transformation succeeds remains to be seen. But the ambition behind it is undeniable. It is an attempt to build industrial growth with the participation of the people themselves. Not everyone is convinced that popular shareholding will deliver the results its supporters expect. As the program gains attention, it has also attracted criticism from international observers, economists, and commentators who question whether such an ambitious experiment can succeed over the long term. One concern involves governance. Critics argue that collecting money from hundreds of thousands of citizens is only the beginning. The greater challenge is ensuring that projects are managed efficiently, transparently, and profitably. Without strong oversight, public trust could be damaged. Others point to financial risk. Any investment carries uncertainty, and not every factory, agricultural enterprise, or mining project will automatically become successful. Some observers worry that ordinary citizens could face disappointment if certain projects fail to meet expectations. Supporters of the initiative respond that risk exists in every development strategy. They argue that dependence on foreign loans, external aid, and imported products also carries significant risks. From this perspective, popular shareholding is not risk-free, but neither is the status quo. Another criticism is that community-owned enterprises may struggle to compete against large international corporations. Yet supporters note that many successful industrial nations protected and supported domestic industries during their early stages of development. Ultimately, the debate reflects two different visions of economic progress. One emphasizes integration into existing global financial structures. The other seeks to build stronger domestic ownership and control over productive sectors. Whether popular shareholding becomes a historic success or an important lesson remains uncertain. What is clear is that Burkina Faso has opened a conversation that extends far beyond its borders. The question is no longer whether Africans can participate in development. The question is whether they can become owners of it. Whether popular shareholding ultimately succeeds or fails will only be known years from now. Economic transformation is never measured in months. It is measured in generations. Yet even at this early stage, the experiment taking place in Burkina Faso has already captured attention across Africa because it challenges assumptions that many people considered unquestionable for decades. Development discussions often focused on attracting foreign investment, securing international loans, and obtaining external assistance. Ibrahim Traore has not rejected cooperation with the outside world, but he has placed a different question at the center of the conversation. What happens when citizens themselves become investors in national development? That question may prove to be the most important aspect of this entire project. Factories can be built, programs can change, governments can come and go, but a population that begins to see itself as an owner rather than a spectator may develop a completely different relationship with the economy. The broader lesson for Africa is not that every country should copy Burkina Faso's model exactly. Each nation has its own history, institutions, and challenges. The lesson is that development becomes more powerful when people feel personally connected to it. Citizens are more likely to support economic transformation when they believe they share both the responsibility and the rewards. Captain Ibrahim Traore is attempting to turn that idea into reality by linking ownership, participation, and industrial development. He is testing a model that many countries have discussed, but few have attempted on such a scale. History will determine whether this vision fulfills its promise. Yet, one fact is already clear. Burkina Faso has launched one of the most closely watched economic experiments in modern Africa. For supporters of Pan-African development, Africa New Thinking, Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traore, the African Union, Pan-Africanism, and Ibrahim Traore's vision of economic sovereignty. The outcome could influence debates across the continent for years to come. If you enjoyed this analysis, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts below. Your perspective may be part of the conversation shaping Africa's future. What if one of the most important defense stories in Africa today is not coming from a giant military factory in Europe, America, or Asia, but from young engineers in Burkina Faso working with solar panels, cameras, and artificial intelligence? For years, Burkina Faso was seen as a country forced to depend on imported equipment, foreign suppliers, and outside promises. When danger appeared near a village, a military post, or a border road, the country often had to rely on tools designed somewhere else, priced somewhere else, and controlled by someone else. But now, something different is happening. Under Captain Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso is beginning to ask a powerful question. Why should a nation wait for others to protect it, when its own sons and daughters can build the tools of protection themselves? That question is at the heart of this new surveillance system. It is not just about watching from a distance. It is about changing the mind of a nation. It is about telling young Burkinabe engineers that their knowledge matters. It is about telling Africa that security can no longer be separated from technology, dignity, and sovereignty. Don't forget to share your thoughts and let us know where you're from. Every comment you leave helps amplify Africa's voice across the globe. Behind this shift stands a system known as NIM, a locally developed surveillance device created for security and defense needs. According to the description given by its developers, NIM can be installed near military sites, sensitive facilities, or barracks to watch an area day and night. What makes this system important is not only that it can observe, it is that it can think, detect, and follow. With cameras and artificial intelligence, it can recognize people, vehicles, and even flying objects. In a country facing serious security challenges, that kind of early warning can make a real difference. The system is also designed to work with solar panels. This matters greatly in remote areas, where electricity may be limited or unreliable. A surveillance tool that depends only on the power grid can fail at the worst moment. But a solar-powered system gives Burkina Faso a chance to protect key locations with greater independence. The current model has been described as capable of observing about 1 kilometer with its installed cameras. The developers also explained that stronger cameras could extend the range to several kilometers, depending on the need. Some reports and discussions speak of ambitions reaching much farther distances. But the most important point is clear. Burkina Faso is learning how to expand its own eyes across difficult terrain. The device can also be mounted on a mast rising about 18 meters, giving security forces a wider view of the surrounding area. For older viewers who have watched Africa depend on outside powers for too long, this is more than technology. It is a symbol. It says that Burkina Faso is no longer waiting passively. It is building, testing, improving, and preparing its own future. The same spirit can be seen in Burkina Faso's work with drones. The country is not only thinking about fixed surveillance towers, it is also trying to adapt aerial tools to its own security needs. According to the original description, local engineers have designed and produced drone support devices inside the country. These devices are meant to help national defense forces use available equipment more effectively during security operations. Several versions were mentioned, from a simple model designed for one payload to more advanced models that can carry several. A newer rotating design was also described as part of the continuing innovation process. For this video, the important lesson is not the technical detail. The important lesson is the direction. Burkina Faso is moving from being only a buyer to becoming a builder. That is a major mental shift. When a country only buys imported systems, it must wait for permission, delivery, spare parts, foreign technicians, and foreign prices. But when its own engineers understand how to design and repair equipment, the country gains freedom. It can adapt quickly. It can improve a device after real experience in the field. It can teach younger engineers. It can build knowledge that stays inside the nation. This is the kind of defense thinking that Captain Ibrahim Traore appears to be encouraging. He is not simply asking, "What can Burkina Faso purchase?" He is asking, "What can Burkina Faso produce with its own hands and its own intelligence?" That question matters for all of Africa, because the future of security will not belong only to the countries with the biggest budgets. It will also belong to the countries that know how to think, innovate, repair, and adapt faster than the threats around them. Not everyone is convinced that Burkina Faso can succeed on this path. Critics, especially in parts of the Western media and policy community, often argue that the country lacks the financial resources, industrial base, and advanced electronics sector needed to build a sustainable defense technology industry. They point out that demonstrating a prototype is very different from deploying thousands of reliable systems across an entire nation. These concerns deserve to be taken seriously. Building a modern defense industry requires years of investment, skilled engineers, reliable supply chains, and continuous research. No country develops these capabilities overnight. However, there is another side to this discussion. History shows that many of today's leading industrial nations started with modest ambitions. Japan rebuilt its industries step by step after the Second World War. South Korea transformed itself over decades through education, manufacturing, and technological innovation. Even countries now recognized as technology leaders once depended heavily on foreign equipment before developing their own capabilities. Burkina Faso is not claiming to compete with global military powers today. Instead, it is taking the first steps toward solving its own security challenges with solutions designed by its own people. That distinction is important. Success should not be measured only by how sophisticated a device appears today. It should also be measured by whether a country is creating engineers, laboratories, local manufacturers, and a culture of innovation that can continue improving year after year. Perhaps the greatest achievement is not the surveillance tower itself. It is the confidence growing behind it. Every locally designed project gives young Burkinabe engineers another reason to believe that they can contribute to their country's future, rather than waiting for solutions to arrive from abroad. In that sense, the debate is no longer only about technology. It is about confidence, independence, and the determination to build instead of simply buying. If these projects continue to grow, the lasting legacy of Captain Ibrahim Traore may not be measured by a single surveillance tower or a locally developed drone component. His greatest impact could be the change in mindset that he is trying to inspire across Burkina Faso. For decades, many African countries were taught that advanced technology had to come from somewhere else. Young engineers often believed that the highest achievements would always be designed in foreign laboratories and imported at a high cost. That belief created a cycle of dependence that was difficult to break. Traore appears to be promoting a different vision. Instead of asking what Burkina Faso cannot afford, he encourages people to ask what Burkina Faso can create. This approach places education, engineering, innovation, and local talent at the center of national security. Whether every current project succeeds is almost secondary to the larger transformation taking place. Each prototype gives students a reason to study science. Each locally manufactured system encourages businesses to invest in technical skills. Each successful innovation builds confidence that future generations can solve even more complex challenges. This philosophy extends beyond military technology. It represents an effort to strengthen national resilience by developing knowledge that remains inside the country. Machines can wear out, but experience, engineering skills, and scientific thinking continue to grow as they are passed from one generation to the next. That may ultimately become Ibrahim Traore's most significant contribution. Not simply introducing new equipment, but encouraging an entire generation of Burkinabe citizens to believe that they can become creators rather than consumers of technology. If that confidence continues to spread, its influence may last far longer than any single piece of hardware ever could. Burkina Faso's experience also offers valuable lessons for many other African nations facing similar challenges. Every country has its own history, resources, and security concerns. But one principle applies almost everywhere. Long-term independence begins with developing local knowledge. For decades, many governments invested heavily in purchasing equipment, while investing far less in the engineers who would one day design, maintain, and improve that equipment. Burkina Faso is attempting to reverse that pattern by placing greater value on technical education, innovation, and domestic problem-solving. This does not mean that international cooperation should disappear. Modern technology is often built through partnerships, shared research, and global trade. The lesson is not to reject cooperation, but to participate in it from a position of growing capability rather than permanent dependence. If more African countries encourage young scientists, software developers, electronics specialists, and engineers to solve local problems, the continent could gradually build stronger technological foundations, surveillance systems, renewable energy solutions, communication networks, and emergency response technologies all represent opportunities where African innovation can make a meaningful difference. Of course, this transformation will require patience. Research takes time. Skilled professionals require years of education. Industries grow through repeated successes and occasional failures. Progress is rarely a straight line. Yet every successful prototype sends an important message. It tells young people that innovation is possible at home. It encourages investors to support local industries. It inspires universities to strengthen engineering programs. Most importantly, it reminds African societies that sustainable development is built not only through natural resources but also through human talent. The future of Africa may depend less on what it imports and more on what its own people are able to imagine, design, and create together. As we reach the end of this story, one thing becomes increasingly clear. The surveillance system developed in Burkina Faso is more than a piece of equipment. It represents a new way of thinking about national security, technological independence, and the future of African innovation. Whether these early projects eventually evolve into a large defense industry remains to be seen. There will undoubtedly be technical challenges, financial limitations, and difficult decisions ahead. But every nation that has ever built a successful industrial base began with a first step. Burkina Faso has now taken one of its own. Perhaps the most remarkable achievement is not that a locally designed surveillance system can monitor strategic areas using artificial intelligence and solar energy. It is that thousands of young Africans can now see proof that advanced technology does not have to remain the exclusive domain of wealthier nations. It can also emerge from determination, education, creativity, and confidence. For supporters of Pan-African cooperation, this story reflects the broader vision of Pan-Africanism strengthening Africa by investing in African talent. For Burkina Faso, the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traore has encouraged many citizens to believe that innovation can become part of national sovereignty. Whether discussed within the African Union or by observers following the rise of Africa New, the name Ibrahim Traore has become closely associated with debates about self-reliance and technological development. If you enjoyed this analysis and want to follow more stories about Africa's transformation, remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this video. Your support helps us continue exploring the people, ideas, and innovations shaping the future of the continent. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in our next video. While the world is still arguing about artificial intelligence, Burkina Faso is quietly asking a different question. Not whether AI will change the future, but whether it can save lives today. In the Sahel, the battlefield is not always visible. Sometimes the greatest danger is hidden under dust, buried beneath a road, waiting for a military convoy, a supply truck, or a young soldier who may never see it coming. Mines and improvised explosive devices have become one of the cruelest weapons used by terrorist groups because they do not need courage, they do not need a face, and they do not need to win a battle. They only need one hidden explosion to create fear. But inside Burkina Faso, a new answer is beginning to appear. Young engineers, working with the needs of the army in mind, have started building smart defense systems using robots, sensors, and artificial intelligence. These are not just gadgets. They are tools designed to protect human lives before danger reaches the soldier. And if you care about stories of African innovation, stay with this channel, because what is happening in Burkina Faso may be one of the most important signs of a new Africa rising. This is not only the story of one mine-detecting robot, it is the story of a country trying to build its own defense technology ecosystem. It is about engineers who refuse to wait for foreign solutions. It is about a government that sees technology as a path toward sovereignty. And it raises a powerful question. Could this be the beginning of a military revolution truly made in Africa? Burkina Faso did not arrive at this point overnight. The robot attracting attention today is the result of a much larger problem that has shaped military operations across the Sahel for years. Unlike conventional warfare, many attacks begin long before soldiers ever see an enemy. Hidden explosive devices are buried beneath roads, concealed along supply routes, or placed near strategic positions. A single mine can stop an entire convoy, destroy expensive equipment, and, most importantly, cost human lives within seconds. Traditional mine detectors have helped reduce these risks, but they also come with important limitations. Many require operators to move dangerously close to suspicious objects. Most rely primarily on metal detection, making it difficult to distinguish between actual threats and harmless metallic debris scattered across the terrain. That challenge inspired a group of Burkinabe engineers to think differently. Instead of creating another conventional detector, they designed a remotely operated robotic platform capable of staying approximately 100 meters away from its operator. Equipped with metal sensors, gas sensors, and artificial intelligence-assisted analysis, the system combines multiple sources of information before warning the operator about a possible explosive threat. When a suspicious object is identified, the robot can send an alert, activate an audible warning, and even mark the location with paint, allowing military personnel to evaluate the situation from a safer distance. The long-term vision goes even further, including the possibility of integrating neutralization capabilities into future versions. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect is not that this robot uses artificial intelligence. Countries around the world are already exploring AI for military applications. What makes this project remarkable is that Burkinabe engineers chose to solve one of their country's most urgent security challenges with technology they are developing themselves. Rather than waiting for expensive foreign solutions, they began building a system tailored to their own battlefield conditions. That shift in mindset may prove to be even more important than the robot itself. If this robot were the only technological achievement emerging from Burkina Faso, it would already deserve attention. But the bigger story is not about one invention. It is about a country gradually building its own defense technology ecosystem. An ecosystem is much more than a single product. It connects engineers, universities, researchers, software developers, manufacturers, and the military around one common goal: creating solutions designed for Burkina Faso's own security challenges. The mine detection robot is only one part of that vision. Alongside it, discussions have expanded to locally developed drones, armored vehicles, intelligent monitoring systems, communication software, and advanced sensor technologies. Although many of these initiatives remain under development, together they reflect a clear strategic direction. This changes the conversation completely. Instead of asking whether Burkina Faso can build one successful machine, the more important question becomes whether it can continuously design, improve, and maintain its own defense technologies. That distinction matters because imported equipment solves immediate problems, while local expertise creates long-term resilience. Engineers can adapt systems to changing battlefield conditions, improve software, repair equipment without depending entirely on foreign suppliers, and gradually strengthen national technical knowledge. Building this kind of ecosystem also encourages cooperation. Universities educate future engineers. Researchers develop new ideas. Private companies manufacture components. The military contributes operational experience and practical feedback. Together, they create a cycle of innovation that becomes stronger with every project. No modern defense industry was created overnight. Every successful nation began with prototypes, testing, setbacks, and constant improvement. Burkina Faso now appears to be taking those first important steps. Whether these efforts eventually grow into large-scale production remains uncertain, but the determination to build technological capability at home may become the country's greatest strategic achievement. Behind many of Burkina Faso's recent technology projects is a broader vision that extends beyond engineering. It is a vision that places science, innovation, and self-reliance at the center of national development. President Ibrahim Traore has repeatedly argued that lasting independence cannot rely solely on political sovereignty. A nation must also strengthen its ability to produce, innovate, and solve its own problems. Within that vision, technology is no longer viewed as a luxury reserved for wealthy countries. Instead, it becomes a strategic tool for protecting lives. strengthening national security, and reducing long-term dependence on foreign suppliers. This perspective helps explain why locally developed defense projects have received growing public attention. Rather than encouraging young people to wait for opportunities abroad, the message increasingly emphasizes building solutions at home. Engineers, researchers, and university graduates are encouraged to apply their knowledge to challenges facing Burkina Faso, whether in defense, agriculture, healthcare, or digital technology. The mine detection robot reflects this philosophy. It demonstrates how local talent can respond directly to local security needs instead of relying entirely on imported equipment designed for different environments. While no single invention can transform a nation's defense capabilities overnight, every successful prototype contributes valuable experience, technical expertise, and confidence for future projects. This approach also carries an important economic benefit. Investing in engineers creates knowledge that remains inside the country. Every design, every software improvement, and every field test strengthens domestic expertise that can support future innovations across multiple industries. Of course, technology alone cannot solve every security challenge. Effective institutions, sustainable investment, and continuous research remain essential. However, by encouraging innovation and supporting local technical talent, Burkina Faso is attempting to build something more durable than a single military project. It is investing in the human capacity needed to create the next generation of African solutions. For many observers, that may become Ibrahim Traore's most enduring contribution, not simply promoting new technologies, but helping inspire a culture where solving national problems through science and innovation becomes part of the country's long-term identity. As Burkina Faso continues investing in locally developed defense technologies, international reactions have become increasingly divided. Supporters view these efforts as evidence that African nations are beginning to build the technical capacity needed to address their own security challenges. Critics, however, remain cautious. One common argument is that Burkina Faso lacks the financial resources to sustain an advanced defense industry. Others question whether locally developed systems have undergone enough operational testing to prove their effectiveness under real battlefield conditions. Some analysts also point out that modern defense technology often depends on imported electronic components, making complete technological independence difficult to achieve. These concerns deserve serious consideration. Building reliable military technology requires years of testing, continuous investment, and rigorous evaluation. No responsible observer should assume that a promising prototype automatically becomes a fully operational military system. At the same time, history shows that every successful defense industry began with modest experiments. Today's global defense manufacturers were once small engineering teams developing their first prototypes. They improved through repeated testing, practical experience, and long-term commitment rather than instant perfection. For Burkina Faso, the most significant achievement may not be claiming to possess the world's most advanced technology. Instead, it is demonstrating the determination to solve national security problems with domestic knowledge whenever possible. Even if certain components continue to come from international suppliers, designing, integrating, maintaining, and improving complete systems within the country represents an important step toward greater technological independence. Ultimately, the debate should not focus solely on whether Burkina Faso has already reached the level of established military powers. The more meaningful question is whether it has begun building the scientific foundation that could support future innovation. If that process continues, today's prototype may one day be remembered not as the final destination, but as the first milestone in a much larger journey toward African technological self-reliance. The lessons emerging from Burkina Faso extend far beyond military technology. They speak to a broader question facing many African nations today. How can countries strengthen their future without waiting for others to build it for them? The first lesson is that innovation begins with solving real problems. Burkina Faso did not start by trying to compete with the world's largest defense industries. It started by addressing one of its own most urgent challenges, protecting soldiers from hidden explosive devices. That practical approach gives research a clear purpose and creates technologies that respond directly to local needs. The second lesson is that investing in people is often more valuable than investing only in imported equipment. A modern machine can be purchased, but the knowledge required to improve, repair, and redesign that machine must be developed at home. Every engineer trained, every researcher supported, and every student encouraged to pursue science strengthens the country's long-term capacity for innovation. The third lesson is the importance of collaboration. Governments establish priorities. Universities educate future specialists. Research institutions generate new ideas. Private companies manufacture products. And the military provides operational experience. When these sectors work together, innovation becomes sustainable rather than accidental. This model also has applications far beyond national defense. The same expertise used to develop sensors, robotics, artificial intelligence, and communication systems can contribute to agriculture, healthcare, transportation, disaster response, and environmental monitoring. A country's investment in technology rarely benefits only one sector. Perhaps that is the most important message of all. Burkina Faso is not simply attempting to build smarter defense equipment. It is trying to cultivate a generation of innovators capable of solving African problems with African solutions. If more nations across the continent choose to follow a similar path, the future of Africa may be shaped less by imported technology and more by the creativity, determination, and talent of its own people. As this story comes to an end, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The conversation was never really about a robot. It was about a mindset. For decades, many people assumed that Africa's future would always depend on technologies designed somewhere else. Yet, Burkina Faso is attempting to challenge that assumption by encouraging its own engineers, researchers, and young innovators to create solutions for the problems they understand best. The road ahead will not be easy. Developing advanced defense technologies requires funding, research, testing, and years of continuous improvement. There will be setbacks, criticism, and difficult lessons, but every nation that now leads in science and technology once faced those same obstacles. Perhaps the most important achievement is not the machine itself, but the confidence it inspires. It reminds young Africans that innovation is not limited by geography. Great ideas can emerge wherever people are willing to learn, experiment, and persevere. So, what do you think? Could Burkina Faso become a model for other African nations seeking greater technological independence? Share your thoughts in the comments because your perspective is part of this important conversation. And if you enjoy exploring stories about innovation, leadership, and Africa's transformation, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next journey. Whether you call it Pan-African progress, the vision of Captain Ibrahim Traore, the spirit of Pan-Africanism, or simply the determination of ordinary people, one message remains clear. Burkina Faso is demonstrating that Africa New is not only a slogan, with leaders like Ibrahim Traore encouraging self-reliance, cooperation through the African Union, and confidence in local talent. The dream of building solutions truly made in Africa is becoming increasingly real. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video. For more than 60 years, Burkina Faso watched its wealth leave the country In its most basic form, gold was dug from the ground but refined elsewhere. Cotton was harvested from the fields but turned into fabric in foreign factories. Farmers worked under the hot Sahel sun, yet much of the value created from their labor ended up thousands of miles away. Now imagine something different. Imagine a market of 1.4 billion consumers suddenly opening its doors to Burkina Faso. Imagine those doors opening without tariffs, without many of the barriers that have traditionally limited African exports. For many observers, that announcement from China was the headline. But the real story may not be happening in Beijing at all. The real story may be unfolding in Ouagadougou. Because while China was opening a market, Ibrahim Traore was preparing something else. He was preparing Burkina Faso to enter that market differently than before. Before we explore that possibility, it is important to understand what Burkina Faso has been trying to escape for decades. The country followed a familiar pattern seen across much of Africa. Raw materials left. Wealth left with them. Cotton was exported as cotton. Gold was exported as gold. Agricultural products were exported with little processing. The countries that bought those resources often earned far more by refining, manufacturing, packaging, and selling finished products than Burkina Faso earned from producing the resources themselves. That reality created a painful contradiction. Burkina Faso was rich in resources but struggled to translate those resources into widespread prosperity. The problem was never the absence of wealth beneath the soil. The problem was the inability to capture enough value before that wealth crossed the border. Today, that may finally be starting to change. China's decision to grant zero-tariff access to African exports is being described by many economists as one of the most significant trade openings in modern African history. For Burkina Faso, the announcement was especially important because it offered something that previous generations rarely had direct access to: one of the largest consumer markets on Earth. A market of 1.4 billion people changes the conversation. For years, African nations were often told that development depended on aid packages, loans, or foreign assistance programs. China presented something different. Instead of offering a donation, it offered market access. Instead of promising support in the future, it reduced barriers that had previously made trade more difficult. That distinction matters. Aid can help solve temporary problems. Access to customers can create long-term economic growth. Under the new arrangement, products from Burkina Faso can enter China with significant advantages compared to many previous trade conditions. For farmers, exporters, and manufacturers, that creates opportunities that simply did not exist before. But it is important to understand what this policy does and does not do. Zero tariffs do not automatically make a country rich. They do not build factories. They do not train workers. They do not create industrial capacity. What they do is open a door. And history shows that open doors only benefit nations that are prepared to walk through them. This is why the story becomes much more interesting when we shift our attention from Beijing to Burkina Faso itself. China has provided access to the market. The question is what Burkina Faso intends to sell inside that market. If the country continues exporting mostly raw materials, the gains may be limited. Raw cotton, raw gold, and unprocessed agricultural products generate far less value than finished goods. But if Burkina Faso can export refined gold, textiles, processed foods, and manufactured products, then the impact of zero tariffs becomes far more powerful. The opportunity is real. The challenge is real as well. And that challenge is exactly where Ibrahim Traore enters the story. Ibrahim Traore appears to understand a reality that many resource-rich countries have struggled to overcome. Having valuable resources is not enough. The real question is, who captures the value created from those resources? For decades, Burkina Faso exported gold and cotton, while most of the higher-value activities happened elsewhere. Refining, manufacturing, branding, packaging, and large-scale distribution were often controlled outside the country. As a result, Burkina Faso participated in global trade, but remained near the bottom of the value chain. Traore has repeatedly argued that this model cannot continue if the country hopes to achieve genuine economic sovereignty. His approach is built around a simple idea. Burkina Faso should not only extract resources, it should process them. One of the clearest examples is gold. Instead of sending large amounts of gold abroad for refining, the government has supported the creation of a national gold refinery. The goal is not merely symbolic. Refining gold inside Burkina Faso allows more economic activity to remain within the country. It creates jobs, develops technical expertise, improves oversight, and potentially increases government revenue. The same thinking is visible in the mining sector more broadly. Through state participation and greater control over strategic resources, the government is attempting to ensure that national wealth contributes more directly to national development. But perhaps the most important aspect of Traore's vision is not a specific project. It is a change in mindset. For generations, many African economies were encouraged to focus on extraction, produce raw materials, export them, import finished goods. Traore is challenging that formula. He is asking a different question. What happens when the country that grows the cotton also produces the fabric? What happens when the country that mines the gold also refines the gold? What happens when economic value stays closer to the people who create it? Those questions are becoming increasingly important because China has now opened a market that may reward countries capable of producing more than raw materials. And that is exactly why the next stage of Burkina Faso's strategy may prove even more important than the first. If gold represents Burkina Faso's mineral wealth, cotton represents its opportunity to build a modern industrial economy. For decades, Burkina Faso has been one of West Africa's major cotton producers. Every year, farmers grow and harvest cotton across the country. Yet the biggest profits have rarely stayed in Burkina Faso. The reason is simple. Cotton was often exported as a raw material. Once it left the country, the next stages of production happened elsewhere. Foreign factories turned cotton into yarn. Yarn became fabric. Fabric became clothing. Each step added value, created jobs, and generated profits outside Burkina Faso. This is the cycle that Ibrahim Traore wants to change. One of the most important symbols of that effort is the IRO Tex Burkina textile project. The goal is not simply to build another factory. The goal is to create a larger industrial chain inside Burkina Faso. The vision follows a clear path. Cotton becomes yarn. Yarn becomes fabric. Fabric becomes finished products. Every stage creates additional value. Every stage creates more employment opportunities. Every stage allows more money to remain inside the national economy. This is how many successful manufacturing nations developed. They did not become wealthy simply because they possessed natural resources. They became wealthy because they learned how to process those resources themselves. The difference can be enormous. A single bale of cotton provides income mainly for the farmer who produces it. A textile industry supports farmers, factory workers, transport companies, technicians, managers, and exporters at the same time. That is why industrialization matters so much to Burkina Faso's future. And if China's tariff-free market remains open, Burkina Faso may eventually export textiles and finished products instead of raw cotton alone. If that happens, the country will not simply be selling resources. It will be selling value, jobs, and economic strength created at home. History is full of nations that missed great opportunities because they were not prepared when those opportunities arrived. Burkina Faso is attempting something different. At almost the exact moment China opened its market to African exports, Burkina Faso began taking steps to increase domestic processing, strengthen industrial capacity, and gain greater control over its resources. Whether by design or coincidence, these two developments are now intersecting in a way that could reshape the country's economic future. Think about the situation from a strategic perspective. China has created access to one of the largest consumer markets in the world. That opportunity alone is significant. But market access only becomes transformative when producers have something valuable to sell. This is where Traore's economic vision becomes important. The National Gold Refinery, textile projects, and efforts to expand local processing are all attempts to ensure that Burkina Faso enters global markets with higher value products rather than raw materials alone. In many ways, this is a story about preparation meeting opportunity. For decades, Burkina Faso had resources but lacked sufficient industrial capacity. Now, industrial capacity is beginning to emerge just as a major export market becomes more accessible. That combination does not guarantee success. There are still major challenges ahead. Factories must become productive. Workers must be trained. Infrastructure must improve. Investment must continue. But opportunities of this scale do not appear every generation. That is why many supporters of Traore believe the current moment may represent a historic turning point. Not because China is offering special favors, not because prosperity is guaranteed, but because Burkina Faso may finally have a chance to move from exporting what it has to exporting what it creates. China opened the door. Traore is trying to build the road that leads to it. And for the first time in many decades, those two developments are happening at the same time. Not everyone is convinced that Burkina Faso is moving in the right direction. Critics in Western policy circles often argue that the country may simply be replacing one dependency with another. According to this view, moving away from France while building closer economic ties with China does not automatically create economic sovereignty. It merely changes the identity of the external partner. Others argue that China is primarily interested in access to African resources and new markets for Chinese products. They point to trade imbalances and warn that African countries could remain suppliers of raw materials if they fail to industrialize. These concerns deserve serious consideration. However, there is another side to the debate. Every major power pursues its own interests. France did. Britain did. The United States does. China does as well. The real question is not whether China benefits. The real question is whether Burkina Faso benefits at the same time. That answer will depend on what happens inside Burkina Faso over the next several years. If the country continues exporting mainly raw gold, raw cotton, and unprocessed agricultural products, many critics may be proven correct. But if Burkina Faso succeeds in refining its gold, expanding textile production, and developing local processing industries, the outcome could look very different. In that scenario, China would not simply become a buyer of resources, it would become a customer for products carrying more value created inside Burkina Faso itself. Ultimately, the debate is not about China versus the West. It is about whether Burkina Faso can finally move higher in the global value chain and capture more of the wealth generated by its own resources. The story of Burkina Faso is not really about tariffs. It is not even primarily about China. It is about what a nation chooses to do when a rare opportunity appears. For more than 60 years, Burkina Faso exported raw materials while much of the value created from those materials was captured elsewhere. Gold left the country. Cotton left the country. Agricultural products left the country. The resources were Burkinabe. but the greatest rewards often were not. Today, the situation may be changing. China has opened a market of 1.4 billion consumers. For the first time, Burkina Faso has access to an enormous commercial opportunity with fewer barriers than ever before. But history teaches us that open markets alone do not create prosperity. Factories create prosperity. Skills create prosperity. Industrial capacity creates prosperity. That is why the actions of Ibrahim Traore matter so much in this moment. While many people focus on the open door in China, Traore has been focused on preparing what Burkina Faso will carry through that door. Gold refining, textile production, agricultural processing. These are not simply economic projects. They are attempts to keep more value inside the country and build a stronger foundation for future generations. The outcome is still uncertain. The challenges remain enormous. But for the first time in decades, Burkina Faso is trying to move beyond the role of a supplier of cheap raw materials and toward the role of a producer of higher value goods. Whether that vision succeeds or fails will shape the future of the country for years to come. And perhaps that is the lesson for Africa New, for the Pan-African movement, for the African Union, and for every nation seeking greater economic sovereignty. The goal is not simply to own resources. The goal is to transform those resources into lasting prosperity. That is the vision many supporters see in Captain Ibrahim Traore, in Burkina Faso, in Pan-Africanism, and in the broader hopes surrounding Ibrahim Traore's economic agenda. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and join us as we continue exploring the stories shaping the future of Africa. For years, Captain Ibrahim Traore has been known as the leader standing at the center of Burkina Faso's fight against terrorism. His name has often been associated with military operations, national security, and the effort to restore stability across the country. But in 2026, a different kind of battle is beginning to attract attention. This new battle is not being fought with weapons. It is being fought with knowledge, savings, investment, and economic participation. The Second International African Stock Exchange Fair, known as CBE 2026, has introduced a conversation that goes far beyond finance. At the heart of the event is a simple but powerful question. Who should finance the future of Burkina Faso foreign institutions and outside investors? Or the people of Burkina Faso themselves? Supporters of this vision believe that true sovereignty extends beyond national borders. They argue that a country cannot be fully independent if it depends heavily on external funding to build its future. This is why CBE 2026 has attracted attention as more than a financial gathering. For many observers, it represents a new front in the broader struggle for economic sovereignty. If you enjoy learning about the major transformations shaping Africa today, make sure to subscribe to the channel and follow our future reports. To understand why this idea is gaining momentum, it is important to look at the challenges facing Burkina Faso. Since 2022, the country has devoted significant resources to security and reconstruction efforts. These priorities require substantial funding. Yet military victories alone cannot guarantee long-term independence. A nation may secure its territory while remaining financially dependent on others. This reality has led to growing discussions about economic sovereignty, where protecting national interests means not only defending land, but also strengthening the ability to finance development through domestic resources and citizen participation. CBE 2026 was presented under a simple but highly strategic theme: financial markets, and financial inclusion. The central question was equally straightforward. How can the stock market be brought closer to ordinary people? For decades, financial markets across much of Africa have often been viewed as spaces reserved for wealthy investors, large corporations, and financial professionals. Many citizens have never owned a share, purchased a bond, or participated in any formal investment activity. As a result, millions of people save money without ever becoming part of the broader economic growth that their savings could help create. This is precisely the challenge that SIBA 2026 seeks to address. According to the organizers, the objective is not merely to promote stock exchanges. It is to change perceptions. The event aims to demonstrate that investment opportunities should not be limited to a privileged few. Instead, financial participation should be accessible to students preparing for their future, farmers seeking greater financial security, market traders building small businesses, and workers hoping to create long-term wealth for their families. This represents a significant shift in thinking. Rather than focusing exclusively on attracting foreign investors, the discussion increasingly centers on empowering domestic investors. The goal is to help citizens understand how financial markets work and how they can participate responsibly. For supporters of this approach, every citizen who learns to invest becomes more than a saver. That person becomes a contributor to national development. Small investments, when multiplied across thousands or even millions of people, can help finance businesses, infrastructure projects, and economic growth. In this sense, SIB 2026 is more than a financial exhibition. It is an effort to democratize investment and transform ordinary citizens into active participants in building Burkina Faso's economic future. One of the most important ideas behind Burkina Faso's emerging economic strategy is the belief that savings should not remain idle. Across Africa, millions of people save money every month. They put aside small amounts from salaries, business income, farming activities, or family support. Yet, much of this money never reaches the productive sectors of the economy. This creates a significant gap between personal savings and national development. Supporters of financial inclusion argue that when savings are transformed into investments, they become a powerful engine for growth. Instead of remaining inactive, these resources can help finance roads, energy projects, housing developments, schools, and businesses that create jobs. This philosophy is visible in Burkina Faso's recent efforts to mobilize resources from its citizens and its diaspora. One notable example is the Diaspora Bonds Initiative, which seeks to encourage Burkinabe living abroad to contribute directly to national development through structured investment programs. Rather than relying exclusively on external lenders, the country is exploring ways to channel the commitment and financial capacity of its own people. The significance of this approach extends beyond the amount of money raised. It represents a different vision of development. A worker living overseas is no longer viewed simply as someone sending money home to relatives. That individual can also become an investor in national infrastructure and economic transformation. Even relatively small investments can have meaningful collective impact when participation becomes widespread. Thousands of citizens contributing modest amounts may ultimately generate resources capable of supporting major development projects. For advocates of economic sovereignty, this is where the real power lies. National development becomes a shared responsibility rather than a process driven primarily by foreign capital. In that sense, every saver has the potential to become a nation builder, and every investment can become a contribution to the future of Burkina Faso. Many experts believe that financial education may be the most important element of any long-term strategy for economic sovereignty. A country can create investment opportunities, launch financial programs, and encourage citizen participation. However, If people do not understand how money works, these efforts will have limited impact. This challenge is not unique to Burkina Faso. Across many countries, people spend years studying mathematics, history, science, and literature without ever receiving practical education about savings, investing, risk management, or wealth creation. As adults, they are expected to make important financial decisions despite having little formal preparation. This is one reason why discussions at SIBA 2026 have extended beyond stock markets and investment products. There is growing interest in promoting financial literacy among younger generations and introducing financial education into schools and universities. The goal is not to turn every student into a stock trader. Instead, it is to help future citizens understand fundamental concepts that can improve their economic security. Learning how investments work, understanding the relationship between risk and return, and recognizing the importance of long-term planning can empower individuals throughout their lives. For young entrepreneurs, financial knowledge can improve business decisions. For workers, it can support retirement planning. For families, it can help build greater stability across generations. Supporters of this approach argue that economic development begins with informed citizens. Roads, factories, and infrastructure remain important, but human knowledge is equally valuable. A population that understands finance is better equipped to save, invest, and participate in national growth. In the long run, the most significant achievement may not be the number of people who purchase stocks or bonds. It may be the creation of a generation capable of making informed financial decisions and taking greater control of its economic future. As Burkina Faso advances its vision of economic sovereignty, not everyone is convinced that the path will be easy. Critics, particularly in parts of the Western media and policy community, have raised concerns about governance, political freedoms, and the long-term stability of the country's institutions. Some observers argue that strong economic ambitions must be accompanied by strong democratic institutions, transparent regulations, and reliable legal protections. From this perspective, attracting investment requires more than patriotic enthusiasm. It requires confidence that financial markets will operate fairly and that investors will have access to accurate information. These concerns deserve consideration. A successful financial market depends heavily on trust. Citizens will only invest their savings if they believe their money is protected and if they understand the risks involved. Transparency, accountability, and effective oversight are therefore essential components of any strategy designed to expand public participation in finance. At the same time, supporters of Burkina Faso's current direction argue that many international discussions focus heavily on political controversies while paying less attention to efforts aimed at increasing domestic economic participation. They point out that encouraging citizens to invest, promoting financial education, and mobilizing local savings are legitimate development goals that deserve serious examination. The debate, therefore, is not simply about politics, it is also about development strategy. Can a country strengthen economic sovereignty while improving transparency and investor confidence at the same time? This may be one of the most important questions facing Burkina Faso in the years ahead. If the country succeeds, it could demonstrate that domestic capital and citizen participation can play a larger role in national development. If it fails, critics will argue that ambitious rhetoric alone cannot replace the institutions required for long-term financial growth. The challenge is not choosing between sovereignty and transparency. The real challenge is ensuring that both advance together. The discussion taking place in Burkina Faso extends far beyond one country. Across Africa, governments continue to face a common challenge. Development requires capital. Yet access to financing often depends heavily on external loans, foreign investment, and international institutions. This reality has led many policymakers to ask whether a greater share of development could be financed through domestic resources. In this context, Burkina Faso's efforts offer several lessons that may interest other African nations. The first lesson is the importance of mobilizing local savings. Every country possesses financial resources within its own population. While individual contributions may appear small, collective participation can create significant pools of capital capable of supporting national priorities. The second lesson involves financial education. Citizens cannot participate effectively in financial markets if they do not understand the basic principles of investing, risk management, and long-term